Sarah Ferguson, yes, Fergie, the former Duchess of York, she is next to be arrested in the growing Epstein misconduct in public office probe.
Sarah Ferguson, popularly known as Fergie, has reportedly refused to return to Britain ever since her ex-husband, Prince Andrew, was arrested. But now, the shocking controversy is that Fergie could be next in line for arrest because of her alleged ties to Jeffrey Epstein. According to recent reports, newly revealed Epstein files have uncovered hidden details about both Fergie and Prince Andrew that the public had never seen before. But what exactly is this latest information? Why is it surfacing now? And why is Fergie reportedly avoiding Britain out of fear of arrest? Join us as we uncover why Fergie may be the next to face legal scrutiny. The real reasons Sarah Ferguson won't return to Britain. In recent years, Sarah Ferguson has rarely been seen in the United Kingdom. By early 2026, she no longer appeared to have a single permanent home, with reports placing her in different locations as she kept a low profile amid growing public scrutiny. She spent time at Paracelsus Recovery, a high-end wellness clinic in Zurich, Switzerland, between late 2025 and January 2026. Although this quiet movement had been going on for quite some time, no one clearly understood the reason until recently. But to make sense of it, we have to go back to where the story truly began. After their official divorce, Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson have been living together at Royal Lodge in Windsor Great Park, an arrangement that raised eyebrows, but one that both seemed comfortable with. The two had long maintained a close relationship even after their marriage ended in 1996, and in many ways, they functioned more like a family unit than a divorced couple. They shared the sprawling property, raised their daughters together, and were frequently spotted attending events as a pair. To many observers, it looked less like a broken marriage. During those quieter years at Royal Lodge, the two were often seen supporting each other publicly. Sarah Ferguson, known widely as Fergie, stood by Andrew through early waves of criticism and never seemed to distance herself from him the way others in his circle eventually would. She attended family gatherings with him, traveled alongside him on occasion, and made no secret of the fact that she still cared deeply for him. She even spoke warmly about him in interviews, describing him as her best friend and the father of her children. For a time, it seemed like the two had found a comfortable rhythm away from the spotlight. Sarah Ferguson had her own battles during this period. She faced financial difficulties, public criticism, and health challenges, including a breast cancer diagnosis that she disclosed publicly. Through all of it, Andrew was reportedly a steady presence in her life. Their co-living situation, unusual as it was, seemed to work for them. Friends described them as genuinely close, a couple who never really let go of each other despite the formal end of their marriage. That closeness, however, would later make it impossible to discuss one without the other when the Epstein story exploded into public consciousness. Jeffrey Epstein had been a part of Andrew's life for years, a friendship that began in the 1990s and continued long after Epstein's first conviction in 2008. That continued association was something Andrew was widely criticized for, and it cast a long shadow over everything that followed. What many people do not always mention, though, is that Sarah Ferguson also had a connection to Epstein. When the Epstein files began to be released and scrutinized more closely, her name appeared in documents as well. It was reported that Epstein had paid off around $24,000 worth of her debts, a revelation that added an uncomfortable dimension to the whole story. But what she did next shocked everyone. She later acknowledged the payment and expressed regret.
This time last year, I would never have been able to talk to you. I couldn't talk to you.
Describing it as one of the biggest mistakes of her life. The fact that both she and Andrew had financial and personal ties to Epstein made the story far more complicated than a simple case of one royal's bad judgment. As public pressure mounted around Andrew, his position became increasingly untenable. The civil sexual assault case brought by Virginia Giuffre was the breaking point in terms of public trust. Giuffre alleged that she had been trafficked by Epstein and forced to have sexual encounters with Andrew on multiple occasions, allegations he has consistently and firmly denied. In early 2022, he reached a settlement with Giuffre, without admitting any liability. The settlement did not end the controversy. If anything, it deepened public suspicion and made his continued presence in royal life a political liability for the monarchy. He had already stepped back from public duties in 2019, following a catastrophic television interview with the BBC that was almost universally considered a disaster. His explanations failed to satisfy critics, and the backlash was severe. Sponsors and charities began cutting ties with him almost immediately. What followed was a slow but steady dismantling of his public role. Then, in 2025, the palace moved more formally, stripping him of his royal style, titles, and honors. He stopped being referred to as the Duke of York in official contexts and was removed from royal listings and ceremonial roles. The decision was widely understood as an attempt by the institution to insulate the monarchy from the damage his continued association was causing. The removal of his titles was followed by something even more concrete and humbling. Andrew was asked to leave Royal Lodge, the Windsor property he had called home for years and where he and Sarah Ferguson had been living together. This was a significant blow to Prince Andrew. Royal Lodge was a large, prestigious estate, and losing it meant a very visible step down in status. He relocated in early 2026 to Marsh Farm, a modest farmhouse on the Sandringham estate owned by King Charles. The property had reportedly been prepared with security upgrades ahead of his arrival, but it represented a dramatically reduced existence compared to what he had been used to. What happened to Sarah Ferguson following the move from Royal Lodge is not entirely clear in public reporting, but the shared chapter of their life at Windsor had effectively come to an end.
Did you take it?
Absolutely, yes. And it was given to me, and I got it in the car and then returned it straight away.
The woman who had stood beside him through years of controversy and personal struggles now found herself tied to a household being reshaped by royal authority. For many observers, this was the clearest sign that Prince Andrew's downfall had moved beyond public criticism and become an institutional issue within the British royal family. In February 2026, the situation took another serious turn. Reports said Andrew was questioned by police over allegations that he shared information with Jeffrey Epstein while serving as a UK trade envoy. The claims suggested that sensitive details may have been exchanged, raising concerns that went beyond personal scandal and touched on national interests in the United Kingdom. Andrew denied wrongdoing, and the case was described as ongoing, but the fact that a senior royal faced such scrutiny marked a moment few had once thought possible. Now attention has also turned to Sarah Ferguson. How deep was her connection to this controversial circle, and could the investigation widen to include her as well? Stay with us, because the next details reveal a chain of events far more complex than many expected. The truth behind Sarah Ferguson's Epstein connection. When the U.S., the Department of Justice released a fresh tranche of Epstein files on January 30th, 2026, more than 3 million pages of documents tied to the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, it set off a chain reaction that reached deep into British public life. Among the names that emerged with stunning clarity was Sarah Ferguson, the former Duchess of York and ex-wife of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. What made the revelations so damaging was not just that she knew Epstein, but that the emails and records showed the full depth of a friendship she had publicly renounced years earlier. A spokesperson for Ferguson had said the previous year that she had severed her ties with Epstein as soon as she was aware of the extent of the allegations. But the DOJ documents told a different story. They appeared to show that not only did she maintain contact with him, but she visited his Miami home just 5 days after he was released from prison in 2009, having served 13 months of an 18-month sentence for soliciting prostitution from a minor. That visit damaged her public image. She had not quietly distanced herself from Epstein. Instead, she went to see him while he was still legally known as a sex offender, just after he was released from jail. The emails made it worse. In them, Ferguson referred to Epstein as a legend and the brother she had always wished for. In January 2010, she reportedly wrote to him, describing him as a legend and expressing deep appreciation for his generosity and kindness, even jokingly suggesting that he should marry her. In March 2011, she made a public apology in London's Evening Standard newspaper, saying she would have nothing ever to do with Jeffrey Epstein ever again. But it didn't end there. Then, barely 2 months later, she reportedly emailed to say she was scheduled to appear on Ez's television show and wanted guidance on how to respond to questions about their relationship, explaining that she wanted to be sure he was aware and to seek advice on how he preferred the matter to be handled. The contrast between her public apology and this private communication was stark, and it undermined much of the credibility her earlier statements had retained. The files also stated that Epstein described Epstein as a genius for assisting with promotion of a children's charity while he was still serving a prison sentence tied to his conviction for soliciting a minor. In a March 2010 email,
I know that deep down I'm okay, so many people can write horrible things, and every day.
She allegedly made an inappropriate remark about her then 19-year-old daughter in a tone suggesting a level of familiarity normally reserved for a close confidant. The fallout was swift. Her charity, which focused on improving the lives of women and children, shut down soon after the documents became public. 6 of her companies, where she was listed as sole director, applied to be struck off the register at E. A children's book she authored was withdrawn by its publisher, and several charities ended their association with her. She largely disappeared from public view, later being seen at Paracelsus Recovery and subsequently in Ireland. As dramatic as her personal decline appeared, she was not the only prominent British figure linked to the Epstein material. Her former husband faced scrutiny with far more serious legal implications. On February 19, 2026, Andrew, formerly Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, was arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office, marking the first arrest of a senior royal in centuries. He was released later that day under investigation, meaning he was neither charged nor cleared. Documents indicated that he allegedly shared confidential trade information with Epstein. He has denied wrongdoing. The controversy extended beyond the royal household. A senior political figure and later ambassador to the United States was also drawn into the scandal. An internal report had earlier noted Epstein's notably close relationships with both Andrew and Mandelson. Subsequent disclosures described friendly correspondence, past praise, financial transfers totaling tens of thousands of dollars were also cited in the documents. On February 23, 2026, Mandelson was arrested at his London home on suspicion of misconduct in public office and later released on bail. The episode created political pressure for the Prime Minister, who had appointed him ambassador. Starmer later said Mandelson had misrepresented the extent of his contact with Epstein and removed him from the post, as calls for accountability intensified within government circles. The central legal issue in both Andrews and Mandelson's cases, misconduct in public office, is a centuries-old common law offense involving a serious abuse of public trust. Legal analysts note that convictions are rare and difficult to secure, with outcomes varying widely if charges are ever proven. Ferguson's legal position differs. She has not faced a criminal investigation of the type involving her former husband because she never held public office. However, the closure of her companies and charity has raised the possibility of civil disputes if donors or partners argue they were misled about her relationship with Epstein. No such claims have yet been formally pursued, but legal review of the large volume of released documents continues. Questions have also been asked about whether the disclosures could be further affected, especially as more details continue to come out and public attention remains on her past connections. But beyond the Epstein connection, many are asking deeper questions. Did Ferguson's marriage to Andrew and their eventual divorce really push her out of the royal household? And if so, why? Let's take a brief walk back to see how it all began. The shocking story of Sarah Ferguson and Prince Andrew's royal marriage. Sarah Ferguson was not exactly living a quiet life before she met Prince Andrew. She had grown up in a privileged but somewhat unconventional household. Her father, Major Ronald Ferguson, was a polo manager and had close ties to the royal family, which meant Sarah was no stranger to the circles these people moved in. After her parents divorced when she was 13, she went on to build her own life, working in publishing and public relations in London. She was known for her outgoing personality, her sharp wit, and a certain boldness that set her apart from the more reserved women typically seen at royal events. She was not trying to be a princess, she was just being herself, and that turned out to be exactly what caught someone's attention. Prince Andrew, on the other hand, had already lived through quite a bit by the time he was in his mid-20s. He had served in the Falklands War in 1982 as a Royal Navy helicopter pilot, and that experience had given him a certain confidence and groundedness. He had also been through a very public relationship with the American actress Koo Stark, which had caused quite a stir and eventually fizzled out under the pressure of royal scrutiny. By the mid-1990s, he was single and very much in the public eye as the second son of Queen Elizabeth II. The two had actually crossed paths before, mainly because of their shared Polo World connection through Sarah's father. But the moment things shifted was at Royal Ascot in 1985. They were seated next to each other at lunch, and by all accounts the conversation just flowed. Sarah was funny, direct, and completely unintimidated by who he was. Andrew, used to people being overly careful or formal around him, clearly found that refreshing. They hit it off immediately, and what followed was a romance that moved quickly, perhaps because both of them were people who knew what they wanted. They dated for about a year, keeping things somewhat under wraps, but not entirely. The press noticed, as the press always does. By early 1986, speculation was running high, and then in March of that year, Andrew proposed to Sarah during a private weekend at Flores Castle in Scotland. She said yes.
I think, Andrew, actually you designed it, didn't you?
I helped in this design.
What do you mean with sketches and things?
When the engagement was announced publicly, the reaction was warm and enthusiastic. People liked Sarah. She felt real in a way that the public connected with, and there was a sense that she and Andrew genuinely enjoyed each other's company rather than performing a duty. They married on July 23, 1986, at Westminster Abbey. It was a grand affair, as royal weddings tend to be, with crowds lining the streets and the whole thing broadcast to millions of people around the world. On that day, Sarah became the Duchess of York. She looked genuinely happy, laughing and waving, and Andrew looked equally delighted. It did not feel stiff or ceremonial in the way some royal events do. There was warmth between them that came through even on television. But then, something also began to happen in their marriage. The early years of their marriage were, by most accounts, difficult, not because of any lack of feeling, but because of circumstance. Andrew was still very much a working naval officer, which meant long stretches away from home. Sarah was left to navigate royal life largely on her own, and that was not easy. The institution had its rules, its expectations, and its ways of doing things, and Sarah was not naturally inclined to conform. She was outspoken, she was spontaneous, and she did not always get things right by the royal family's standards. The press, which had initially adored her, began to turn. Stories about her spending, her behavior, and her general unsuitability for royal life started appearing regularly. They had 2 daughters together. Princess Beatrice was born in 1988, and Princess Eugenie followed in 1990. But even as the family grew, the cracks in the marriage were becoming harder to ignore. Andrew's absences were a constant strain, and Sarah struggled with the isolation and the scrutiny. Those who knew her during this period have described her as increasingly unhappy, feeling trapped and misunderstood. By 1992, the marriage had effectively broken down. They announced their separation in March of that year, and that summer brought one of the most damaging moments of Sarah's public life. Photographs of her on holiday in the south of France with a financial advisor named John Bryan were published by a British tabloid. The images were intimate and humiliating, released while she was still technically a member of the royal family. The fallout was severe. Her reputation took a hit it would take years to even partially recover from, and her relationship with the palace became strained in ways that lasted a very long time. What followed was a prolonged and often painful process of separation, divorce, and rebuilding. The divorce was finalized in May 1996. It was relatively quiet compared to what was happening with Charles and Diana at the same time, but it carried its own weight. Sarah did not receive the same financial settlement that some had expected. She was left with significant debts and had to work hard to support herself and her daughters. She threw herself into writing, business ventures, and eventually public speaking, trying to carve out an identity outside of the one she had briefly held inside the palace walls.
And how right she was. And today we talk about Lisa Marie. We look at Priscilla,
What made the whole story more complicated and harder to define neatly is that Andrew and Sarah never entirely walked away from each other. Even after the divorce, they remained close. They shared custody of their daughters and were seen together at family events, at school pickups, and on holidays. There were persistent rumors over the years that they had never really let go, and both of them said things in interviews that suggested the relationship was never simple or fully finished. Sarah described him as her best friend on multiple occasions. Andrew, for his part, never remarried. Their relationship continued to exist in this unusual middle ground, separated but connected, divorced but still present in each other's lives in a way that was hard to categorize. When Andrew's own serious troubles came much later, connected to his association with Jeffrey Epstein, Sarah stood by him publicly in a way that surprised many observers and angered others. She defended him and continued to live with him at Royal Lodge in Windsor, which only added to the oddness of their situation in the public eye. Prince Andrew had once been a well-respected royal, but the Epstein scandal severely damaged his reputation. Yet he is not the only royal to face public controversy. Others before him were also caught in scandal and were made to answer for it. Let's find out who they were and what consequences they faced. Keep watching. What happened to the royals who faced public scandal? You cannot talk about British royals and scandal without starting with Edward VIII, and for good reason. In 1936, he chose to give up the British throne rather than abandon his relationship with Wallis Simpson, an American woman who had been divorced twice. At the time, the Church of England, the government, and much of the public found the idea of a king marrying a twice-divorced woman completely unacceptable. He had barely served a year as king before the pressure became insurmountable. He abdicated, passed the crown to his brother, and spent the rest of his life pushed to the edges of royal life, never returning to any meaningful role within the institution. His personal life had created a constitutional shock that the monarchy had no choice but to resolve by removing him from the picture entirely. A decade or so later, another member of the same family found herself at the center of a different but equally intense crisis. Princess Margaret, sister to Queen Elizabeth II, fell deeply in love with Peter Townsend, a Royal Air Force officer who happened to be divorced. The problem was straightforward and yet impossible to ignore. As the monarch's sister, Margaret, marrying a divorced man would have put her in direct conflict with the Church of England and the broader rules governing the royal family. The country watched as the story played out in newspapers and drawing rooms alike, turning what was essentially a private romance into a national debate. Eventually, under relentless pressure from the establishment, Margaret gave Townsend up. Many people at the time saw it as a genuinely sad story, a woman forced to sacrifice love for duty. Moving further back in history, George IV provides perhaps the most chaotic example of royal personal life becoming a national embarrassment. Before he even became king, he had secretly married Maria Fitzherbert, a Catholic widow, which was illegal under the royal marriage laws of the time. He was then pushed into an official marriage with Caroline of Brunswick, a union that both parties seemed to despise almost immediately. Their separation turned ugly, with both sides making accusations about the other's behavior and morality. When George eventually became king, he tried to block Caroline from being crowned alongside him and pursued what became known as the Pains and Penalties case, a proceeding that was essentially a public trial of his own wife. Crowds gathered in Caroline's support, not because they necessarily believed everything she said, but because they had grown deeply tired of the king's behavior. The monarchy during this period looked less like a respected institution and more like a very expensive family fight being shown in front of the whole country. People's trust in the royal household fell noticeably. Edward VII, who ruled in the early 20th century, had spent many years as Prince of Wales building a reputation that made many wonder what kind of king he would be. He was linked to gambling, heavy drinking, and a series of affairs over the years. In 1891, he was actually called to testify in a gambling scandal, which was a strange and very uncomfortable moment for an institution that relied heavily on looking dignified. His lifestyle worried people inside the establishment, though it was mostly seen as personal choices and did not lead to any legal consequences. But that is not all. The 1990s brought a different kind of crisis. one that happened in front of TV cameras and newspaper headlines all over the world. The marriage between Princess Diana and the man who would later become Charles fell apart so publicly that the monarchy had to rethink how it handled the media and transparency. Leaked phone calls, televised interviews, and open admissions of cheating from both sides removed any sense that the royal family could stay private. Diana's 1995 interview, where she spoke openly about her unhappiness and questioned if her husband could be a good king, was especially damaging.
On what?
Pop music.
Well, yes, sometimes, yes.
The institution had never faced such exposure before, and it had to adjust quickly or risk seeming completely out of touch. In 2020, Prince Harry and Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, said they were stepping back from their roles as senior working royals, a move the press quickly called Megxit. They moved to the United States and stopped doing official royal duties. The decision caused a big challenge for the monarchy because it was so sudden and came with interviews in which both Harry and Meghan spoke about their experiences in ways that made the family look bad. Unlike most earlier cases, their choice was voluntary and not linked to wrongdoing. Even so, it changed discussions about what the monarchy expected from its members and what members could reasonably expect in return. There are also royals who stayed mostly quiet but still drew unwanted attention. Prince Michael of Kent, a cousin of the late Queen, faced criticism in recent years over his business connections and suggestions that he had used his royal title to get access or business deals. Nothing led to criminal charges, but the situation raised familiar questions about judgment, what it means to hold a royal title, and where the line is between acceptable private business and trading on the family name. What makes these cases important to look at together is the common thread they share, whether it was Edward VIII choosing love over the crown, Margaret being forced to choose duty over love, George IV turning the monarchy into a public show, or Harry and Meghan leaving on their own terms. Each case involved a royal whose personal life clashed with institutional rules in a way the monarchy could not just ignore. The royal family has had to manage these clashes, sometimes by removing the person from their role, sometimes by waiting for the attention to pass, and sometimes by changing how it works. The pattern shows that the conflict between private life and public duty has never been fully solved, only managed, often imperfectly, one crisis at a time. Do you think Sarah Ferguson should face arrest over her ties to Jeffrey Epstein? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Also, click on the next video on your screen. You won't want to miss it.